work, we go to you do it.
No problem. I just want to let people in.
Or the share screen gives you a full screen too. I don't mind doing share screen.
All right. Everyone is starting to pop on. We got the first commenter from Richmond. So, hello everyone. We'll get started right on time. Just wanted to hop in so I can make sure everything is working. And right, Haven. What, Haven? Okay, but I need you to leave the door shut. Okay. Our youngest just got back from preschool.
You've got Home Alone, not quite.
Well, the neighbors came to the back door. That's where they usually find him.
Okay.
There's a where we moved in North Carolina. There are about 4 and 5 year old boys
Oh,
on the on a
nice.
street, so they find each other.
That's heaven.
Yeah, after school each day.
Or the alternative place.
Yeah, yeah. You assume if you're here long enough, they'll all get in trouble together. But
yes. It increases exponentially. It's not, if there's two, it's not twice as much possibility, or 3 times. It goes up exponentially.
yeah. So is the um is it uploaded? Did you?
It's still flipping. Are you starting to worry?
No, you know, I don't know how long because you have so many pictures. I set them when you sent them to me to upload for a while. I don't know how long it took. That's why.
I think we might stop it if it's all right. I can go back and I can use the share screen myself if you don't mind. Would that be all right? Or does that
Why?
mess you up
Well, I think it easier just
to do it from you?
yeah. Let me throw it up
Okay,
there.
it's about 58. I think we better stop this. Okay, I'm going to stop it. All right. Might take too
Now
long.
let's see if you if if you can hit the
Okay.
let's set it up right here. There we go. Hello everyone. We got 2 more minutes.
And if can they hear me? Hello, everyone. If you
Oh
can hear
yeah.
me.
Yes. Yep. So some people are joining through uh Facebook group and others through the YouTube link I sent. But
Okay.
um
So then I'll tell you when I'm ready to put up the first one. Is that all right? We can talk for just a few minutes.
oh yeah,
With this
I'll tell
brand.
them all the boring things
Okay.
that that
You're in charge. And if I look like I have a slight green halo, that's because of my Irish sanctity.
Oh yeah. Well, I had a couple people yesterday at a church say they had no idea what wet the whistle meant, but they learned it from you. So
That's what it meant. I mean, you could use it for any liquid, but nobody meant it for any liquid. The- You probably know that whiskey comes from the Gaelic ishka, baha. Ishka means water, ordinary
mhm.
water, and baha means of life. Ishka baha means the water of life, aquavit, the Scandinavians.
Yeah. Yeah, the oh, for those that weren't on, um during last week on the podcast, we did a preview to lure people to join this class.
Oh, nice.
And I said we were trying to wet the whistle, and Dom explained as our Irish in residence.
Homebrewed whiskey.
Yeah, they though I mean there are plenty in the South here that have
Poteen,
yeah, they make their
homebrew,
own what do they call it, the moonshine. All
moonshine,
right,
I think.
excellent. All right. Are you ready to
Yes.
roll? All right. So I'm going to hit record here. Excellent. Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and this is session 1 from Christmas Stories with John Dominic Crossan. And we will be gathering each Monday through Advent and digging in to some visual lectures that Dom has prepared. We have a number of friends that are helping spread the word and participating. Westar Institute, who Dom's been a part of for a long time, through the Jesus Seminar, help spread the word. And on the podcast during this series, you'll get to hear from some of their scholars working on one of their new projects, the Christ Seminar. Friends from Second Breath have helped been making a host of contemplative, I don't know what the right word is, options available in Advent through the app. Y'all got links if you're in the class for any of this. But also, we have quite a few of you got Dom and Marcus's book, The First Christmas. And some of y'all have been reading ahead and sending in questions, which we will get there. But the outline for our time today at the beginning, in just a minute, Dom will kick things off with a visual lecture. You'll be seeing things if you're watching the video live or later. If you're only listening to the audio and you're in the class, and that's how you usually join the homebrewed classes, you should definitely go check out the video because, well, it is visually rich. It's not just Trip and his random nerd friend that he's doing a class with, waving their hands and possibly drinking. No, see, this is earlier in the day, and Dom has spent years collecting lots of amazing photography to kind of introduce us to the setting and history behind the stories. The two really boring pieces of information before Dom takes over to know is we really want to know your questions. If you're doing this by yourself, reading and processing this stuff together, or if you're in a group, we know there's all sorts of different ways people are using this class together. Send in the questions you have. If it's specific about the book, every author loves that they know that you actually read it and mention the page. There's always that option. But you can respond to any class email. I'll get them, organize them, and play the voice of the people. With Dom, you can drop them in the chat if you're joining live, and on the resource page where you can get everything related to class. You can also respond in audio. Those are always fun. Then I can play you asking the question. Now, do just ask a question. Just giving you a heads up, it turns off after 3 minutes. If your question takes longer than that, think about it before you record it. Anyway, so those are the different ways to send question. And again, if you don't always have to join live, the video and the audio will be on the resource page, and you can access it by using the link on every email with the same password that's on every email. Everyone in the class, there's only one password. You use that password on the resource page, boom. We add the video, we add the audio after each session, and you can go through it at your own pace, use it in your discussion groups. Any way you want. Our goal is to have as many people as possible get to engage Dom and some of his amazing work. So with that, that's all the boring things I have to say, Dom. So now, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. So this is John Dominic Crossan's first Bible study with over 3,000 people in
it. All right. My greetings to all of you out there, whether you're with us in virtual live today or you're reading anytime during the next year. My greetings to you, you great cloud of witnesses out there. Take a look at that opening slide. Trip will be in charge of the slides, let's call them, and we'll be moving through them. It's a visual class. By that, I mean it's image-based. It's not like I'm talking and here's a few visual aids. This is a visual aid, and I need it. These are not visual aids. I'm trying to speak on a double register, of course, in the biblical, which you're reading or hearing, but also in the visual. And a first clue of how important it's going to be is when you look at that background. And if you don't recognize what is behind me, it's all right, we'll get to it. But one of the clues are the names of Matthew and Luke. We're going to be talking about Matthew and Luke. But those medallions from La Sagrada Familia in Catalan, Barcelona, Matthew and Luke are in Catalan. So this is going to be very important. The images are not background. Okay, that's the background behind me now for the moment. They're not background. They are part of the matrix. I want to work on a double register, the visual and the verbal, and I want them to interact with one another. That's why, for example, if we can go back to that first opening slide, you might call it, I emphasize visual classes to celebrate, to question, and to explain the Christmas stories. Now, you notice that plural. It's not one story, it's two stories. So this is to emphasize again, what's the interaction of the visuals? They are the thing itself shown visually, are the thing itself shown verbally in interaction. So if we go to the second one, please. All right, look at that word down there. Parabolic overtures. I don't expect you to understand exactly what it means right now. If you do, maybe you don't even need the lectures, but hold on to it. Parabolic overtures, overtures that are parabolic. This is the first class. It's about differences. The challenge of differing infancy gospels. Now, you know as well as I do that we tend to put them together happily in the crib. There's only one crib. You don't have a Matthew crib and a Luke crib, so they tend to get put in together. I'm celebrating, questioning, explaining the differences. So this first lecture is emphasizing differences. The second lecture then will go into apply what we learned in this first lecture to Matthew 1 and 2. And the third lecture will apply what we learned here to Luke. And then in the fourth lecture, we look not at differences, but at similarities, at such things say as the virginal conception or the Bethlehem birth of Jesus. We look at that. So in the lecture tonight, I'm going to have the introduction, which I'm doing at the moment. Then I'm going to look at two genealogies, twin genealogies. And in one sense, they tell you what it's all about. If you get what's different about the genealogies, you'll be ready for the difference about the annunciation, second thing tonight. Then the difference about the births. And at the end tonight, I'm going to offer a proposal, a hypothesis, a suggestion to try and understand what Matthew and Luke are doing. I want to understand what they are up to. Then you can say you don't like it, you love it, whatever. But you can't respond to somebody until you know what they're saying, even if sometimes at the moment we think we know what the person is going to say before they speak. So let's go to the second one then. First thing, celebrating differences. And now you see once again Matthew and Luke with Jesus sort of trying to come through, if you will, from the background behind them. And again, you notice it's in Catalan because that'll move us to the next one. We're looking, of course, as you recognize, at the nativity frontal, it's called, let's say, of Gaudi's masterpiece, La Sagrada Familia, in Catalan, Barcelona, Spain. Most of the time, I'm going to be showing you our own images that Sarah and I took there. Sometimes there's some things we can never get, and this is one of them, to get distance enough from it. In one sense, I'm using this, and it's a celebration. This is part of the celebration before we even get to questioning. But it's a powerful part of the celebration. You know, if you have a crib beneath the tree, and maybe the tree in your home maybe not so much a agricultural tree as something that comes through the mechanization. What does the tree have to do? Is it just decoration? And why is Gaudi's nativity embedded in livestock stuff, not just trees and flowers and the rosaries, of course, but animals? It's almost like this is part of, he would say, nature, I would not say nature, I would say evolution. So one of the huge questions beneath all the other questions we're going to be asking in the next 4 weeks, in fact, the question is, what does religion have to do with evolution, with cosmic evolution? Or put another way, what does, guided by Gaudi maybe, what does Christianity's advent have to do with humanity's evolution? That's really the question behind the question, beneath the question, above the questions, below the questions. So if you go to the next one, if you're inside the cathedral, the first time I was there was in 1960, there was no roof there, looking up at the way he has forced you to look up. I have read the mathematics of this and the geometry of this, and to be quite frank with you, I don't fully understand it, but it does remind us that evolution seems to think in mathematics and geometry. Because hold on to that image and then go to the next one. You find exactly the same thing if you imagine yourself, courtesy, I think, of Alamy in this case, lying on the floor of the forest and looking up. So in every way, what Gaudi wants you to imagine is inside what he would say nature, which I translate as evolution, because nature is not just lovely sunsets and, nice views and all the rest of it. Nature is also evolution. So you're forced by La Sagrada Familia to put religion back within evolution. I'm putting it that way, within evolution. Maybe religions are simply intimations of evolution. So hold on to those first two images. And now go to the next one, which focuses more closely on what you heard. I could only see this, to be honest with you, after I got back home and Sarah had taken a huge number of close-ups or distance pictures, and we blew them up onto kind of connected with our television. Everywhere you look, the nativity, we're just focusing on the nativity frontal, the story of Matthew, the story of Luke, the nativities are filled with images of ordinary life. I mean, it's embedded in a forest. And you don't think, well, this is really cute. Isn't this nice? He's kind of got a nice background. This is Matrix. Jesus, his nativity is all involved with domestic animals. Look at them. They're the barnyard, as it were. And then down at the bottom right, you can see, it's very hard to see, on the right, there's a woman. I don't know if you can see my cursor. She's carrying a basket of bread there. And there's another woman here who's with a wine. Maybe it's home-brewed wine. Let's see. So women, after all, no matter what you say about male priests or anything else, women, the bread and the wine, and then, of course, the phoenix. So everywhere we are on this La Sagrada Familia, you're coaxed, you're forced, you're seduced to put this back into the matrix of evolution. So if we can go to the next one. All right, we're now ready for the second part, to start questioning these differences. And throughout this, I will use this as my logo. So you're constantly remembered of these medallions inside the church. There's four evangelists, of course, there. Matthew in Catalan and Luke in Catalan. All right. So the next one then. This is keeping Trip very busy. All right, a close-up of the nativity facade. And you might notice it's kind of shaped like a tree. I have no idea if that's accidental or simply part of the architecture. This is the one part of La Sagrada Familia that Gaudi actually did the way he wanted it and saw it done the way he required. And on this, facing your screen, you may be able to see down here, if you can see where my cursor is moving. Usually I make the cursor much bigger, but I forgot to do it, sorry. This is the Matthean side, the left side. And then the Lucan side is the right side. You can see the shepherds are coming there. This is the nativity. This is the annunciation. And the magi are coming from Matthew. So this is Matthew's side here and Luke's side here. And they're all there. And this will be my background. Over here on the wider one that Trip just showed you there, for example, there's more Matthean ones, but we'll get to them. Okay, the next one. To begin the differences, the first, I'm going to be looking at 3 sets of differences. As I said, genealogy, annunciation, birth. And I'm emphasizing the differences to set up. And I'm now repeating what I said before. My intention in all of this is to understand authorial intention. What's Matthew up to? What's Luke up to? And it's kind of common courtesy, if you're listening to somebody or reading somebody, kind of shut up for a moment to make certain that you know what they're saying. Then you can say, I disagree, I dislike. Then you make your judgment. That's fine. That's fine. But first of all, you have to say what they're up to. And it's important in this case because these writers thought they were writing not just for then, for a moment in the first century, they claimed to be writing for now. Wow, that's a big claim. They thought they were writing for now, for an ongoing now. So it's fair enough to ask of them, what did they mean then? And also ask, what does it mean now? And if it doesn't mean anything for now, then they blew it because they were writing for now. So we're going to look at the differences in the genealogies of Matthew and of Luke. And we can start with the next one then. This is sort of ironic. You know, 3 times in my life, I walked through that door into La Sagrada Familia, and I never realized until I was doing close-ups for this, that that's the genealogy. As you spiral up that doorpost, I don't know what you call it, the doorpost, up towards the nativity, which is right here. As you do that, you're reading the genealogy of Matthew. Yeah, you can see probably on the left there of it, the magi are coming in towards the nativity, and then on the other side, the shepherds are coming. But I never realized, I walked right past it. All I noticed was that, excuse me, extremely crude piece of wiring around it so you don't rub it. So all it does is you kind of don't go near it because it's spiky and wires. But that's actually the Matthean genealogy spiraling upwards, or the Lucan genealogy. I try to read it, but the high resolution is not high enough to read which it is. So we're going to look at the genealogies as the first. And if you move to the next one, 5 differences. And in one sense, I think almost this first difference is a clue to the whole thing. And the differences between the genealogies should be enough to tell you what's really going on in all of this. Because the people who put together the New Testament weren't idiots. They could read the genealogies. They knew they were completely different, that you had over 40 and people in stems in Matthew, but you had twice as many in Luke. And wait a minute now, what's going on? So first of all, location. In Matthew, the genealogy is given right off. It opens Matthew, as you know, before Jesus even gets born. You're told who he is. Now look over in Luke. Strictly speaking, it's not even in Luke 1 and 2. It's not in the infancy story. It's when Jesus begins his public life after John the Baptist. Now that's the powerful indication of what they're up to. Matthew is going to tell this was preordained for all, as it were, because it starts before even Jesus got here. He was slotted into an ongoing program, as it were. And as you know, there's 14 from Abraham to David, then 14 generations from David to the Babylonian exile, and 14 to Jesus. It had to be 14, 14, 14. So of course, it was all predestined. That's Matthew's point. And I don't think he'd give a hoots when he gets the names right in between, except maybe for Abraham, of course, and David and Jesus. Luke, on the other hand, is thinking like a good Roman. When a person hits the public stage in life at whatever age, Augustus did it at, say, what, 17 or 18, that's the time you give the genealogy. And of course, the genealogy can be quite different. So location, location, location. Second one, direction. As you know, the genealogy in Matthew descends. You start with Abraham and come down to Jesus. And that goes, of course, with the location. You're coming down to Jesus. All of human history is like waiting with bated breath for the arrival of Jesus. Look at Luke. The genealogy ascends from Jesus to Adam. But Jesus as Son of God and Adam is Son of God. And that comes up, for example, if you look at the third. The generations. By the way, there's people who can spend hours comparing all the names in this. I can't even do that because I don't think either Matthew or Luke, as I said, with the exception of maybe Abraham and David, cared about the details in between. These are huge advertisements for Jesus. Matthew, genealogy has 42 generations between Abraham and Jesus. Now, even comparing the same period in Luke, he has 57 generations between Abraham and Jesus. Do I think it would bother them if somebody drew their attention to that? I think they would have said, get a life, get over it. So the next one. For example, this is pointed out again and again, and it proves that it's not very important. The grandfather of Jesus, the father of Joseph, is it Jacob or is it Heli? Or do we conflate them and say he had two names? Once again, I think the best advice from Matthew and Luke would be, get over it. And the final one then, the intention. This is what's really important, I think. The genealogy of Jesus in Matthew is the genealogy of the Messiah. It's called that. It's the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. And that's done by showing you that it's all planned. It was foreordained. That's why the 14 works. You're expecting Jesus, as it were. If you are watching genealogy, you know he's due any day. Over in Luke, the genealogy of Jesus as the Son of God. He's called my Son, the Beloved, by God, just before the genealogy starts. Remember, that's the baptism. So the purpose of the genealogy is to proclaim Jesus as the Messiah or the Son of God. I shouldn't say or and the Son of God, because certainly Matthew thinks both and Luke thinks both. But to emphasize different things, the Messiah, the Son of God. That's their intention. And I think into that, they'll take any list of people they can find anywhere and make it up. Let me move to the next one then. This is our next differences. It's a set of 3 differences between the 2 annunciations. And again, I remind you that the function of all of this is to try and figure out what they're up to. The annunciation you have to Mary in Luke, and the annunciation to Matthew in Matthew, of course. Wait a minute, that's a goof. I'm sorry. That should be annunciation to Joseph. That's a monument to how many times you go over this and over it, and you still can't see a mistake staring you in the face. Okay, annunciation to Joseph in Matthew, sorry. Okay, next one. This is an image just to remind us that this is a rather strange thing. This Raymond Telasco, the late Raymond Telasco, was a Chicago artist, and he had a magnificent image painting. It's called on the back, we have it in our house, the Angel of Annunciation. What I want you to think is, when you think of the Annunciation, don't you think automatically, almost inevitably, it's to Mary? I'm deliberately emphasizing him because he simply says the angel of annunciation. He doesn't say the whom. And there's no Mary, or there's Joseph in this image. And it's a little unusual because Gabriel seems to be delivering the Holy Spirit a little bit like, FedEx or UPS at the moment. So if you look at the next one, then this is the Annunciation, a lovely one of the Annunciation at the top of La Sagrada Familia, the Nativity portal. And by the way, notice all around it, there's, foliage and everything else, but intertwined in there is the rosary. You see it? So it's almost necessary to get high definition images of La Sagrada Familia and use them for meditation almost. All right, next one, please. Okay, back to my point. If somebody said the Annunciation, most of these images are simply called the Annunciation. Nobody says the Annunciation to Mary, but actually, strictly speaking, you're either talking with Luke of the Annunciation to Mary or with Matthew of the Annunciation to Joseph. And again, there'll be reasons. Why do we think it went that way? Okay, looking now to the next one. I want to emphasize this as well, that there is an annunciation to Joseph. And part of the problem is that Joseph gets 4 annunciations. There's 5 annunciations. We'll see that in the next lecture, why. 5 annunciations in Matthew 1 and 2. The Magi get 1. Joseph gets 4. So it's kind of dreams seem to regulate the whole procedure. What fascinates me about this church is it's one of the few places that I've been able to find where there's an annunciation to Joseph, which is certainly the annunciation to Joseph about Mary's pregnancy, not an annunciation to go to Egypt or come back from Egypt or go to Nazareth. And you can only tell that if it's in a line, if it's in a series, a progressive series of scenes. So that's why I'm looking at this church from Lombardy in Italy with gratitude for the person whom I'm crediting with it from the web, of course. Let's look at the pictures. If you could turn to them, please. After a long time, they've been abraded badly, but you can make out, for example, a sequence of pictures. Again, the importance is if an annunciation to Joseph is not in a sequence of pictures, you have no idea which of the 4 it is. In this scene, to the left of your screen, you can see the angel speaking to Mary with her maid, Mary's maid, looking on from the background to see what's going on. So the angel speaks to Mary. Then you can make out enough to the right hand of your screen of the second scene, the visitation. So we're in a series. And then as you move on to the next image in the flow of images within, you see the dream of Joseph. You can make out enough, I think, that the angel is speaking to him and Joseph is asleep. And the reason we're certain that that is his first annunciation is that if you move to the next one, you can see Mary is pregnant. Mary is going with Joseph behind her on her donkey, on her mule or whatever, to Bethlehem for Jesus to be born. So we're following Luke's story. It's not the flight into Egypt. The only way you can know that is Mary doesn't have Jesus on her lap. She's going to Bethlehem. So this is definitely the annunciation to Joseph. And as you move to the next one, it raises this huge issue. Now, I'm not asking a historical question about Jesus. I'm asking a literary question about Matthew. Why does Matthew raise this whole issue that Joseph sees Mary pregnant and suspects adultery since he knows he's not the father, and goes through the whole thing, and then the angel has to tell him, go ahead, marry. This is Mary is conceived of the Holy Spirit. Wouldn't it have saved a lot of trouble to have told Joseph a few verses earlier? Or why wouldn't you presume that Mary, having received the news from the angel, greets Joseph when he comes home, I suppose, from work and says, good news and bad news. I am pregnant and you're not the father. Why does Matthew, and in a way, this is the key to Matthew, the key to the whole understanding of Matthew. Why does he set up this whole problem? And in this image, it's a rather unique image in this church, you see the implications of the project, of the problem of not having the angel announce to Joseph that Mary is going to be pregnant, if he wants to have it announced to Joseph at all and not to Mary. Tell him a few verses early so he won't suspect this. And in Numbers, you're told of something called almost a trial by poison, I'm going to call it. A trial by poison almost, where if a woman is accused of adultery, she has to swear that she's innocent, and the words written out are put into a flask of water, and she drinks the water to prove her innocence. It's a rather ghastly scene, and I don't know it from anywhere else. I'm not saying it's nowhere else. I've never seen it anywhere else. And it underlines for me, why does Matthew creates this whole problem of the pseudo-adultery of Mary, which then goes off into all sorts of diatribes against Christianity, that Mary is really, Jesus is born of adultery and all the rest of it. There's no problem with Luke. Luke takes it for granted, presumably, Mary is told by the angel that she's pregnant. Presumably she tells Joseph and off to go, the two of them, to Bethlehem. And there's no question of adultery. So really hold on to that. It's maybe the key difference. Going to the next one then. In Sagrada Familia, one of the scenes there shows, for example, the happy marriage of Mary and Joseph. Yeah, fine. A happy marriage, but at the risk of accusing Mary of adultery and therefore having her possibly, we do not know what would have happened, because obviously if a couple are, in good Jewish law, if a couple are engaged and the husband to be makes an accusation, shall we put it delicately, the burden of proof is on him, not on her. But in any case, you have the happy marriage and the trumpets. If you go to the next one, you can see the trumpets of the Sagrada Familia celebrating the happy marriage. But I want you to remember the problem as we go on. Okay, moving to the next one, please, Trup. All right, going back then to the differences. The first one is about choice. The annunciation is to Mary about her own pregnancy, as we saw. Holy Spirit will come upon you. Matthew, annunciation to Joseph about Mary's pregnancy. The child is of the Holy Spirit. Fine. They're both reassured of the Holy Spirit, but Mary ahead of it. And by the way, Mary gets to say, okay. All those stories about gods coming down to women and impregnating them in Greek and Roman mythology, usually permission isn't asked. At least the Holy Spirit asked, and Mary gets to say, okay. So the choice is the first difference. The second one, the time. Again, the annunciation is to Mary at her own pregnancy, or the annunciation is that it's going to be, if she says okay, and she does, you will conceive and bear a son, says Luke. Over in Matthew, the annunciation is to Joseph, as we've said, after Mary's pregnancy. That creates the whole problem that we've gone into. The child conceived in her. So they're both talking about the time of conception. And then we can go to the third one. The next slide is the result, and we know that. The annunciation of Mary presumes, if you're reading Luke, I don't know anyone who said, "Ooh, how did Joseph find out?" Common sense says, of course, next time Mary met Joseph, she tells him about Gabriel and the visit and the miraculous conception, and that's what you presume, and there's no problem, and off they go to Bethlehem. Now, Matthew, as we saw, there's no report, and then you have the suspicion of adultery, the option of divorce, and all the horror stories that result from that. So again, the question, what is Matthew up to? And then moving to the next. So the next set of differences, set of two differences on the birth of Jesus. This has to do with the witnesses and the context of the birth of Jesus. In Matthew, it's the Magi story and Herod's earthly slaughter. And the Magi, of course, get into the crib, but Herod's earthly slaughter tends to get quietly shelved in the Christmas story. In preference, of course, to Luke, where the shepherd story and God's heavenly peace. So instead of the Magi story, you get the shepherd story. And instead of Herod's earthly slaughter, you get God's heavenly peace. But unfortunately, it may be the Herods of the world in Matthew that stop what happens in Luke. So let's look at the differences then. And you know them, of course. And again, going back to La Sagrada Familia, the Magi, usually shown as three because there are three gifts. We have no idea how many they were, but they are Magi, so they're scholars, Persian priests. Always a little amusing to think of three Iranians in the crib. So you might want to think about that when you're looking at your crib. So the Magi in Matthew, and then if you look at the next one, results in the slaughter at Bethlehem. And again, you wonder, or you should be wondering, are your firstborn child who reaches the age of reason should say, Mommy or Daddy, you know, if this magic star was guiding them all the way to where Jesus was born at Bethlehem, why did they stop off for directions in Jerusalem? This is the danger of the age of reason. You start to ask the obvious questions. And again, I'm asking a literary question of Matthew, not an historical question about Jesus. Why did that happen? Why didn't they just come up from the south and go straight to Bethlehem? Why? And besides, we know it's a caricature that males don't ask for directions. So would three male magi really ask for directions? Or is this the biblical injunction, never ask for directions if you're lost? Anyway, hold it again for the next lecture on Matthew. And moving then to the other side, of course, Luke, the shepherds. So the contrast between the Magi and slaughter, the shepherds and peace. And then going again to the next one. So the center of La Sagrada Familia is the whole heavenly choir. And I'm not sure what to do with some of those people who look like young angels, if angels have children, or whether they're just local people. But the surrounding there is the choir of angels, which are, of course, the ones who bring the news of heavenly peace down to earth. And they all have their instruments. And then in the middle, there's these other people, and I presume they're ordinary people, local people, but they're not in the story. But right down below this, of course, is the birth. So moving then to the next one. All right, part 3, trying to look at these differences now, trying to explain them. And when I say explaining them, I'm giving you a hypothesis, a proposal. This proposal has to be tested, in the next lectures. So it's an ongoing series. All right, moving to the next one. Here's the thesis or the proposal, suggestion, any term you want. Matthew 1-2 is here's the term, parabolic overture to the entire Gospel of Matthew. It's a parabolic overture. It's not the first chapter. It's a parabolic overture. And conversely, Luke 1 to 2, and the genealogy, is a parabolic overture to the Gospel of Luke Acts. Now that has to be tested. The top part, Matthew 1 and 2, will be tested in the second lecture, and Luke 1 and 2 in the third lecture. But let me explain what I mean by parabolic overture, moving to the next one, overture. And by the way, I should tell you, I spent 5 years at a boarding school between 1945 and 1950. The headmaster, Father McClune, loved Gilbert and Sullivan. So every year the students put on a Gilbert and Sullivan play, and they did it for the school and for the townspeople. And so I knew stuff by heart from Gilbert and Sullivan. I am the captain of the pinafore and the right good captain too. I'm very, very good and be it understood I command a right good crew, as long as I don't think I can do it. That's when I first came in with the word overture. Because in Gilbert and Sullivan, the melody that the orchestra plays at the beginning is not just interesting, music to get you going. It gives you the arias you're going to hear when you get into the rest of it. So you say, oh, that's the one that's about that. That's the one about this. That's the one. The overture is not the prelude. It's not the prefix. It's not the prologue. It's like a warning of coming attractions. It's like a teaser of what's going to happen in music. I took it from Wikipedia. The word comes from the French word for opening. It opens the show. Well, yeah, it does more than open the show. So there's a prologue. Overtures usually have tunes which are going to be heard during the opera or ballet. In this way, it prepares the audience for what is to come. Now, that's where I'm getting my word overture from Matthew 1:2, Luke 1:2. They prepare the audience for what is to come. In other words, if you get 1 and 2, you've got the whole story in nuce. Down from Britannica. A more modern form of the opera overture was established by Gluck. He declared that the overture should prepare the audience for the plot of the play. Musical comedies, operettas. Prepare the audience for the plot of the play. Prepare the audience. Both of them say that. So let's see. That's the thesis. Now let me move to the next one. Look at this image. This is an historical overture, let's say. The state funeral of Edward VII in 1910. This was a film taken in Windsor Castle on Friday, May the 20th of 1910. Count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the crowned heads of Europe, including in the middle, of course, the king at that time, George, and behind him, the Kaiser. Should watch your back, George. Anyway, look at that scene, and then let me go to what I mean by a literary overture. Going to the next one. Because here's where I first saw it. In Barbara Tuchman's magnificent book, The Guns of August. It's the story of the first months of the First World War. So it's about 1914, August 1914. She starts it, if you look over to the table of contents, she starts it with the funeral. See it up there? She doesn't call it an overture. It is an overture. There's 3 parts to the book: the plans, the outbreak, the battle. But up front, she puts the story of the funeral of Edward VII. And she says, on that May morning in 1910, the greatest assemblage of royalty and rank ever gathered in one place, and of its kind, the last. It's a funeral for Europe, you might say. It's an overture. And that's where I first really saw it. That's why I want to give the credit. When I read that, and I thought, why does she start in 1910 and not in 1914, or at least the prelude, or way back? She wants you to read this as a mourning, as it were, not just for the royalty of Europe, but for all those who would die in the war to follow. So I call it an historical overture. Now, it did take place. It's not a parabolic overture. So let's move to a second type of overture. The next one, please. Think of this. This is a manuscript from the ending of Luke. You can make it out. And the beginning of John's Gospel. I want you to think of an ancient manuscript, kind of wall-to-wall writing, because papyrus is too valuable to waste. So it's all in capital letters. There's no breaks. There's no chapters. There's no, it ain't what you would call user-friendly. Now, if you happen to kind of know it by heart, as readers would, then you can get in archehenologus and okay, you're rolling. But if you're reading your newspaper like that, you go crazy, even if you know the language quite well. So you'd be very, very happy if you're reading a manuscript like this, if somebody did the next slide. If somebody at the beginning of a manuscript of Matthew or Mark or Luke or John actually gave you an overture, a clue in, an opening section that doesn't just start the story, but gives you an overture to the whole. Almost saying in effect, okay, if you get this first chunk, people, you got the whole. And use it as a lens through which you can see the whole. So, taking Gaudi's 4 medallions inside the cathedral. Now, could you go back, please, Trip? Inside the cathedral for a moment. You have a parabolic overture from Matthew. That's going to be the argument of the next one, that this is a parable. In other words, if you're asking, did Matthew 1 and 2, apart from Jesus and Mary and Joseph and Herod, did that actually happen? No, the answer is it didn't. But neither did the Good Samaritan happen. So if you don't like parables, please take it up with Jesus. He started this bad habit. A parable is a made-up story, what we call a fiction, and at the end of it, Jesus can say, go and do likewise, which means you have to figure out what's the point of the parable and then do likewise. So a parable never happened, but it's telling you something terribly important. So Matthew 1 and 2 is a parabolic overture, for all of Matthew. It could be an historical overture, but it's not. And now if you look over at Luke, over to the third case, that's also a parabolic overture, but to Luke. So since Matthew and Luke have different visions of Jesus, it is no way possible they could have the same infancy story, because each of them is a made-up parable. But its function is to overture the gospel. Now, the alternative, you have 4 gospels, only 2 of them use parabolic overtures, all of them use overtures. Mark, for example, uses an historical overture. He uses John the Baptist. So when you get into Mark and you read what happens to John the Baptist, he comes out of the desert, he preaches, and he gets arrested. Oh boy, you know what this story is going to be about. Somebody called Jesus who will come out of the desert, preach, get arrested, and if you know what happened to John the Baptist, which you'll know at least by chapter 6, you know what's going to happen to Jesus. It's an historical overture. Now, John, of course, would find all of these totally inadequate. John says it's about the Logos. The Logos is a good Greek word, feebly translated as the Word. The Logos is the intelligibility of the universe. It's the Greek conception that the universe, although a mysterious place, kind of makes sense. There are patterns in there that make sense. The stars do regular stuff and the seasons do regular stuff. So the Logos is the intelligibility of the universe. And the awesome claim of John is the intelligibility of the universe is incarnate in Jesus. And of course, the intelligibility of the universe, the Logos, is what we would call today, once again, evolution. That's what makes it intelligible, insofar as it is at all. All right, can we go to the next one? Let me just bring it back to America and Jefferson. Jefferson's Bible that you know about, you know the story. He took Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in 4 different versions in Latin, Greek, Latin, French, and English. That's across the 4 there. He was a president. And he carved them all up to get rid of the stuff he thought was kind of rubbish in plain language. And of course, the stuff that was rubbish was in a way the most important pointers to the whole, because parables, like in the teaching of Jesus, are maybe the most important stuff in there. In any case, he begins with chapter 2. See up there at the top of the 4th column over, chapter 2, if you can see it. He totally dismisses all this kind of rubbish up front. None of this overture stuff. If you look at the Jefferson Bible itself, this is a facsimile version. It's rather fascinating reading. If you go to the next slide, the image here from Peter Mansur, who put together this facsimile version, he says Jefferson had no use for the first chapters of any of the Gospels. And that was a terrible failure. He blew it in plain language. Not for him were the cast of thousands genealogy of Matthew, the prophet Isaiah's evocation of a voice crying out in the wilderness found in Mark, the epistolary prologue or the angelic backstory of Luke. Perhaps least of all, the cosmic poetry of Logos and light offered by John. And it's sad because, with all due respect, President Jefferson, if you can't handle parable, stay out of the Bible. If you can't handle metaphor, stay out of the Bible. By the way, stay out of Shakespeare as well, because these are messages and the authors knew exactly what they were doing. So if you go to the next one, this is our last images then. And again, they are the solution to the differences, but it's a solution that has to be proved or disproved by studying, does it work? So I'm saying the Infancy Gospel, according to Matthew 1 and 2, is a parabolic overture. Now, both those words are absolutely important for me. It could be an historical overture. Could be an historical overture. Maybe if you only had Matthew, we would think it was an historical overture. But we have Luke to compare it with, and then the other two, and Paul, of course, who has nothing about the equivalent story. And then the next one. So for the test of the third lecture, the Infancy Gospel, according to Luke 1 and 2, is again a parabolic overture for the entire Gospel according to Luke Acts. And since any reader who's read Luke Acts, by the way, notice it's not just Luke, it's Luke Acts. So that'll be question for the third lecture. If you compare Matthew and Luke, you know they're different visions of Jesus. Nothing wrong with that. But then, of course, if the overtures are what we think they are, they have to be different. And I think the final image, I think there is one more. Yes. All right. Go back to this, the final image. I think that's actually there's another one in there, but it's fine. I think the final image I wanted to put up there was the Matthew. That's fine. Don't bother, Trump. It's fine. Notice that's Moses, Jesus, and John the Baptist. So that'll do as an introduction to the next one, because when we're looking at Matthew, it's going to be especially Jesus and Moses. And then when we turn to Luke, it's going to be especially Jesus and John the Baptist. So it'll be a contrast in each case, but again, differing contrasts. So that sets us up for the next 2 lectures. And then the last one, as I said, will be looking at what do they both agree on, apart from Mary and other names like that. So I think we are ready. Trip.
All right.
It should happen that there might be any questions.
Oh, well, I want you to know, despite this just being the first time, we were sent quite a few questions in advance and in the chat. So if you are listening live and you want to pop them in there, If it's a specific question, feel free to put question in all caps first. That way I notice it easier if people are discussing and such. But here's one that got sent in. This is from, let's see, First United Methodist in Boca Raton. They were having they started reading the book. They got together and they said they have a number of different faculty members from the local college on there, and they got a discussion and wanted to know what you thought. How is the concept of truth or the concept of history changed during the modernity and the Enlightenment, and how have those changing notions shaped how we would think of the church asserting these texts as true or about our history?
Well, let me preface it by saying I have great trouble understanding a pre-Enlightenment mind. I really do. If you say, well, am I absolutely certain that person didn't mean that literally? I'm never that sure. And I'm going to be blunt. There's enough things going on in our world at the moment, especially in this country, about truth, that I no longer know whether we're in a post-Enlightenment mind to begin with. I find people claiming things that I find less believable than anything in the Bible. Less believable than anything in the Bible. So here's the question. In the ancient world, if somebody dropped dead in the street, they are going to try and explain it by God punished this person for sin. The person was struck dead. I don't believe that. The person could have had a heart attack. So when I read their story, I will record X, let's say somebody died in the street suddenly. I will take that as a fact, as truth, as history, if it's not in a parable, for example, if it was said of somebody. But I wouldn't accept the explanation. And if they, looking back now, would hold to that explanation, I think that's not true. So I don't know how to win an argument with somebody who would say, I think Matthew took that as exactly the way it was, and he parallels with Moses. He intended all of that. He took it as God engineering history to make it come out like that. If he said it, if he took it to be historically true, then he was wrong. But I'm looking at the people who assembled the New Testament, and they were intelligent enough to read all four of those versions. They really were. And I don't believe for a second they couldn't see the divergences. So I think they must have had some concept of metaphorical truth or a parabolic truth, or I can't understand how they didn't do what we want to do, take the two accounts of the infancy, collapse them into one story. Or take the four versions of the New Testament, the gospel according to, not the gospel of, according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and collapse them into one story, the gospel according to whoever. So I think when I use the word truth today, it means it is true to evolution. We can claim that I have my truth, you have your truth. If it works, if it tracks with evolution, it will work. That's why empires do not work. Not because God is punishing emperors or because they're, over proud or whatever. They do not track with evolution because evolution is completely fair to everyone and everything, even to viruses, unfortunately. And empires do not track with evolution. So the truth that I see that judges this empire against that is how it tracks with evolution. That is what the capital T means for me, truth. I don't talk about my truth and your truth and we all have our truth and it's all just mishmash. No, the question is, does your truth track with evolution? If it doesn't, it's not truth, it's opinion without evidence.
Well, one of the things that even mentioning there, like it takes a kind of hubris for Christians in the present to think that the church in its process of canonization were so confident in these particular gospels that they were trustworthy to be included, and completely ignorant of the fact that they don't line up if the truth of it is, the surface level reading, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's this kind of inheritance especially in America, because of its kind of the way our cultural framing around religion and truth is so shaped by kind of anti-intellectualism and frontier religion, a kind of religion demonstrated by kind of hyper piety and a Puritan impulse. There's a lot of like streams that set up American religion to then see a contest with other kind of intellectual pursuits like science and these kinds of things. So then the assertion to say that the Christmas story is telling us truth or calling truth out of us requires you to assert it as a kind of truth that reigns in your cultural moment, be it science or facts and this kind of thing.
Let me insist on one thing. There are claims being made by parables. Parables make a claim. Well, so do metaphors. If you were to say that somebody is a chicken, you're not talking about claws. You're saying the person is a coward, I presume. That's a claim. So claims are being made by these stories. And that's why these people will get killed, because the powers that be understand that claims are being made by these stories. And that the criticism of Herod is being made out of Augustus. So claims are being made. And that must be inserted, because then you have to decide, do you consider those claims to be true or not? Are you on the side of Herod? So that if your power is threatened, the thing you do is you kill. Now, we mightn't do it as crudely as Herod does it. We just do it differently. But that's the questions that these stories are raising.
Yeah. Do you think if you think back to some of the contrasts you were drawing earlier, say between these two birth narratives and those kind of popular ones, say the birth of Caesar or something, what do we know about how those birth stories, say of Caesar, were received in his own context compared to how people received the birth stories of Jesus?
It's fascinating, because in Naples, in a certain room that used to be kept secret, I've forgotten what they called it, there is a lampoon, a very crude, vulgar lampoon of the inaugural story that Aeneas had escaped from Troy with his father Anchises on his shoulder and his young son Justus, Iulus, who fathered the Julian line, and they escaped from Troy. And they're shown rather rudely and crudely, I won't describe it, but caricatured in a way we couldn't show on television, probably. So this is somebody who doesn't accept that Caesar is divine. But they're caricaturing the divinity, if you will. So they know the story. So if somebody was going to assassinate Augustus, did they think he was divine? They might well have thought he was divine and send him off to the gods. So he's not ruling here. So I know they took this stuff seriously, deadly serious. I don't know if they took it literally in our sense, because I don't think they asked the question. The Enlightenment question is, did this happen literally, historically, actually?
Yeah.
Once you ask that question, you're into a different world. But I do know that you would not go up to Augustus and say, you do understand, Your Excellency, you are just a metaphor. I do not think that's smart to do. So if you see his picture on the coin and he says he's divine and son of God, and you have your own opinion on it, and Christians did, be careful in public.
You say that, and I know that we both have a deep love for The Life of Brian. The scene in The Life of Brian where Pilate is talking about his friend from Rome, and the soldiers try not to laugh at his name because he takes it as an innuendo. That scene, when I've done undergrad classes and we're looking at historical Jesus stuff, I always love showing that film. All the people in back, oh, blessed are the cheesemakers. But the Roman centurion is having to keep a straight face because he can't break rank and giggle.
If you focus on Caesar, like that question does, when Caesar took Egypt, one of the first things he did was get rid of Caesarion, the 17-year-old kid born of Julius Caesar, his adopted father and Cleopatra. He didn't kill the children of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, who was his enemy. He killed the child of his adopted father because he might be the son of God. So Caesar took it seriously. I'm absolutely certain. And when poor old Caesarion saw the stranglers coming towards him, I wonder if he said his dying words, "I'm just a metaphor. I'm just a metaphor." You kill for metaphors.
Do you think part of it, I mean, when you've drawn that contrast between even how we think of truth today, a lot of times when our natural tendency when we hear true is to think of the equivalent of a logical syllogism or something you can pin under a microscope or whatever. And I think one of the things, taking seriously the canonization of surface level contradictory text, like what do we make of these differences? What if they're true like a love poem? Right? Like love poems are true because they actually capture this actual real experience that we all know is real. We're moved, animated by it. You see wonderful acts of sacrifice and devotion because of love, but you would never go, yeah, but could you please put that in a syllogism? Or Dom, I'm not going to believe that you have genuine love. You know, that's just not how it works.
No, because the claim that's been made behind these stories is very clear. Do you want Caesar to run the world because he was? Or do you want Jesus to run the world? Now, wait a minute. This guy's the emperor and this guy's a peasant. Is this some kind of a joke? What does it mean if Caesar is the savior of the world to say Jesus is the savior? You've only got one world. How can you have two saviors? Two first responders, as it were. So you'd have to, what are they claiming? What kind of a claim are they making? Then when I hear it, you are perfectly free after you hear it, say, I get it, I reject it. You are not free to say, I reject it before you understand what it said. You really aren't. So that's why we have to at least understand it. Then we can decide.
All right. Nicholas asked in the chat, and there are a couple questions around this. Must a parable be a made-up story? Can history be parabolized, not just a parable historicized? And then there are other follow-ups, say, you know, each family or nation and such, they can be this mixing.
Yes, absolutely. In another book, The Parable, I took the case of Caesar, this would be Julius Caesar, crossing the Rubicon. And there's two parabolic accounts. One has a kind of a ghostly figure on the other side saying, do not cross, do not cross. And the other has a beautiful woman on the other side saying, come on, come on. Obviously, those are both parables. Caesar just crossed the Rubicon because he wanted to get towards Rome. But by parabolizing it, one says, don't do it. You shouldn't have done it. This is a pro-republic parable. The other is an anti-republic, pro-Caesar parable. Yes, of course, you can take a story, and it has been done, and tell it in such a way that people are getting, oh, this isn't just gossip. Because people could listen to the Good Samaritan and say, oh, we got a piece of gossip this morning about a warning, don't go down that road. It's kind of dangerous at the moment. And if somebody said that to Jesus, Jesus would have to, boy, you really blew it. You know, that's not gossip. It could be gossip. But even if that did happen, then Jesus is exalting it from history to become a go and do likewise. So yes, absolutely. A piece of history can be parabolized. Mm-hmm. Actually, what Tuckman did, she took the story of the death and funeral of Edward VII and made a magnificent parable for the First World War out of it.
Yeah. I took a class with a group of, it was like a group mentoring class that write nonfiction. And there are a couple of them that spend quite a bit of time writing nonfiction biographies, and sometimes with the person who, so it's functioning as a dually written autobiography. And they actually use specifically the example. They're like, look, if you're trying to capture the person and, let's say 40 hours of stories, and you're sitting with a famous athlete, right? Yeah. And you're trying to capture it. Sometimes there are 3 or 4 little bits that then you weave into one story, and you go, when you hear it, that's true about the athlete, but it's not literally true at one point. But people hear it that know them and love them and go, oh yeah, that's them. And or people do it at toast at weddings, or eulogies at funerals. There's this, to capture a person, you need to use a narrative and movement, but so often to get at the actual experience you have in encountering the person, the particularities are ultimately distracting for faithful communication of the personhood. Okay, we got a couple questions, and you tell me if this is something we're going to pick up more later about your references to what you mean by evolution and such. Is that something you want to pick up later or not? There are a couple of these. How could you say more by what you mean by tracking with evolution?
All right. No, I can talk a little bit about it because this is where I'm thinking at the moment, actually. I mean, history, I think of history as if you're looking at the ocean and there's spume or sea spray, history is like the spray of evolution. I'm trying to understand, for example, in the 1930s, we had two great metaphors. We had the Third Reich. This is where the future is going to be. And we had the Good Deal. The New Deal. What was Roosevelt's? It was called the New Deal. New Deal, sorry. Now, one of them worked and one of them didn't. I think one of them tracked with evolution, the other didn't. That's what I mean by tracking with evolution. Truth with a capital T is we are not in charge. Now, leave aside arguments about theism or atheism, monotheism or polytheism or anything like that. Leave that out, please. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in gravity or not. Gravity rules. Now, there's ways we can do some things to cooperate, but evolution is there and it has always been there. And the fact that we only found out about it within the last 100 years doesn't make any difference. So I've often been wondering if religions, as I said, are like intuitions. The people realize there's something else seems to be in charge here. Not me, not you, not even what's his name on the throne. And God is one of the ways this is expressed. Now, I'm leaving that out for the moment. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about evolution rules humanity. Whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not, it doesn't make any difference. So tracking with evolution is, when I look at evolution, it seems to be, I'm talking about cosmic evolution. I'm using it the same way that everyone uses it, the way a scientist who knows infinitely more than I do about it would use it. But I'm asking exactly, it seems to me to be eminently fair to everything. If I was running the world, I wouldn't be fair to everything. I'd be very unfair to viruses, earthquakes, volcanoes, tornadoes, and a few other things like that. So it seems to me that the arc of the evolutionary universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Not just the arc of the ethical, the arc of the evolutionary universe bends towards justice. So I'm asking really how religions track with that. That's what I'm trying to see at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think would be fun to pick up, because as the last 3 years I was on faculty at University of Edinburgh doing science and religion, and so whenever people use the word evolution, I always want to know, what do we mean by it, and how is it functioning, and then like which account. And I think especially for those that may have been in religious contexts that see a lot higher or anticipate direct conflict, right, between affirming a kind of larger scientific cosmology and any account of faith. Part of it is just how badly informed large portions of the church are about our cosmic story. The assumption, I think, for many is evolution is basically the justification for the worst expression of capitalism and the destruction of the planet and this kind of thing. And that's such not an accurate depiction of the larger cosmological story. And one of the fascinating elements that have changed just since in the last 40 years of our understanding of evolution is in the 70s and through the most of the 80s, the dominant picture of evolution had this kind of neo-Darwinian synthesis. It had a very kind of closed picture that the engine of it happened maybe at the genes and nothing higher and more complex. And since then, we have a host of different ways where selection, if you think of the power of evolution, like what animates it, happens at the level of groups. You have a host of different kind of ways selection takes place that involves cultural influences, that involve aesthetic decisions by the creature, and all these other kinds of things. When that breakthrough happened in biology, the craziest thing came to the front. That all of a sudden, one of the things that have helped humanity thrive is the ability to communicate symbolically for cooperation and the preservation of wisdom.
Yeah.
Now,
But
that's the connection point when I think of what have religions been doing that we might get to know more of today through the sciences. Well, when you realize that human species has thrived because we have symbolic communication, where we learn to inherit wisdom and learn to cooperate in larger groups for the well-being of the whole at the present, that is a beautiful picture, and one that conflicts with top-down perverse totalitarian powers. Anyway, so that was my intuitions of where you're going.
Yeah, that's it. That's basically where I'm going. It's the Bible doesn't work very well top down. It really doesn't. As soon as you have a king, you need a prophet, knock him off his throne. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple of let's see, we got like 10 minutes. All right. We'll do two more questions. And don't worry, if you've sent in questions, I still have them all. If we didn't get them and you're in the live chat, then send them as an email. That way I can add them to my list here. So here is one. Reed asks, why has, quote, peace through victory been the dominant narrative of history? And why was it so easily internalized into the life of a church when the very preambles or overtures to the Jesus story resist it? And there are a couple of these questions, but when you think of not just the historical Jesus and the canonization, but the bigger picture of the church, how do you see this tension playing out?
Yeah, I think of them like tectonic plates of history, not the tectonic plates below the earth, as it were, but the tectonic plates of history are peace through victory or peace through justice. Those are the only two I see. Peace through victory is a bankrupt system. I call it civilization. What the Bible imagines is, to use a modern word, post-civilization. The criticism of the Bible is never just against this empire or that empire, they come and go, or against Rome. It is against that. The New Testament is certainly in antagonism to Rome, but not because Rome is Roman or even pagan. It's because it is a normalcy of civilization. It's always worked like that. Caesar would be kind of scratching his head if you said to him, there's another alternative to peace through victory. He really wouldn't understand it. He would say, but that's the way of the world. We're just particularly good at it. We didn't invent it. We just got better than anyone else, even than the Greeks. So he would say, that's the way civilization works. Now, we're not imagining going back to barbarism. That is an alternative. The crisis of civilization is that we have worked basically on establishing civilization by declaring war on the environment, on other species, and on ourselves. That was our program when our species, Homo sapiens, first left Africa. That was our program. Declare war on the environment. Now, it seemed okay for a while. Now we're seeing the bills are coming through. So our violence against the environment, other species, and ourselves make the question of our sustainability as a species operational. It's now a question. So that's really where I'm seeing is the point, in a way, of all of this trip. That's what's really going on behind it. Can you have a sustainable religion then? If your religion is simply saying, well, we'll evacuate this world and go off to some other world, some life elsewhere, then I suppose we shouldn't worry too much. It's just like kind of you're staying at a bad location, but you can always move on. I think I want to know whether religion takes seriously, whether your religion, any religion, my religion, takes seriously what we have been doing to the world since we first left Africa. And we were doing it in Africa, I suppose, before we left. I want to know about our species, Homo sapiens. It's supposed to be the wise Homo. Is that a contradiction in terms, wise homo, or is it a bad joke about our species? Because I don't see that we're operating as a species very wisely. I really don't. And I think an awful lot of people are ready to say that at the moment without being apocalyptic or dramatic, that it's a question of the sustainability of the species.
Yeah.
I find much of the Bible, much of the Bible on the right side of that. I really do. Which doesn't mean there's lots of characters in the Bible that are quite happy with civilization and their solution is more more arms. That's all right.
Yeah. All right. Here's the last question. This is from Miranda. She's a minister at a UCC church in Illinois. Her church has a group that will be going through this together. Now, she decided to read ahead in the book because, well, the last 2 weeks of this class are the busy time until Easter for her. And it turned out that reading the beginning of the first Christmas inspired the last Sunday of the church year. So first Christmas, everyone check it out. The last Sunday of the church year, which is Christ the King Sunday. And she goes, I would love to hear Dom riff on this. Not only are Matthew and Luke begin with these parabolic overtures for their gospel, but knowing that the church year ends proclaiming the crucified one as king, I wonder if Advent is not also an overture for the whole journey of the church year. If not, I pretended that's what he believed and used it in the sermon to get people to sign up for this class.
Well, no, she's after. Let's go to Matthew, for example. The Magi come up to Herod seeking directions, we said, and they ask, where's the newborn king of the Jews? Now, this is the dumbest 3 or whatever number of wise men ever did in their whole life. You do not go up, if they know their literature, even ancient literature, you don't go up to the king or anyone in charge and ask who's the new one in charge. Because the first thing he's going to do is try and kill him. You know that. I mean, it's not even suspense. So the next time in Matthew's gospel that you find the term King of the Jews is where? It's on the cross. So right from the very beginning, part of this overture is a warning that the powers that be, the local king Herod, who is appointed by Rome, by the way, his title, his formal title, according to Josephus, given by Antony and Octavian on a good day when they were friends in around 40s, is King of the Jews. So they've gone up to the King of the Jews and asked for the newborn King of the Jews. Now, granted, Herod was already killing off future King of the Jews in his own family, but that's a separate issue. So all of a sudden, there's the question of power, an imperial power, an appointed power, hitting you right in the face. And we think we can get to peace without Matthew. We just go to Luke and there's peace, and we stick the Magi in there with the shepherds, and we won't ask any questions, and it'll all work. And then we wonder why we never get peace, because it's taken out kind of like the ornaments from the attic or the basement every Christmas, trotted out, and then it goes back into the attic or the basement for next year. And it's kind of lovely, but meanwhile, the earth lurches towards oblivion. So that's what I'm really after. Yes, of course, she is absolutely right. This is why we should do 4 more lectures for Easter, of course. Advent is only Advent. It's the coming of a person who has a vision of the world, a human being who's a vision of the world. And I think that vision of the world is absolutely necessary for the world. And that's why in the first century, they give him titles, which we mightn't use today. I don't do lords, except I say good Lord or something. I don't. We're Irish and we don't do lords anymore. We tried to get rid of them like you did. It took us longer. So all of these titles make sense to me in the first century, because if you're announcing that Jesus has a vision for the world that we should follow, Caesar and his local hireling, Herod, is going to try and kill you or oppose you. We mightn't do it as crudely as that today, we would just destroy your reputation or something. So basically, if you take those stories seriously, they do, she's quite right. They set up a rule. I probably wouldn't make as much fuss about Jesus as king, because that's a political title for the first century that makes eminent sense, because Caesar is the king. So okay, if you're taking on Caesar, that's the title you have to use to make the message clear. But it's the meaning behind it that we have to face. That's what we should ask.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that I think that's really helpful, and I love Miranda's question, because so often if you just were to say something like, "Oh, it's Christ the King Sunday," when you say that in a church that has a flag of our current empire running on it, and where the participants are equally it can be deeply committed to their citizenry, deeply committed to their faithfulness to the market, and all those kinds of things. I just think that if the celebration of Christ as King is us reminding ourselves at the end of the church year that the grain of the universe we give ourselves to is one where the one that bears crosses, not the one that builds crosses, is the one we attribute truth and beauty and goodness and such to. Like, that kind of invitation or that kind of conclusion makes sense, that you would tell the narratives this way, right? Like this, what makes the wise men wise? Oh, they kneeled before they kneeled before a baby, not before Herod. What brings the angels out to rocket and proclaim, the new gospel of peace? Oh, it's right here with the shepherds because of the coming of the Christ child. It's that line in, I don't remember the Luther hymn, the Lutherans may know, where he goes, "In manger, cross, and empty tomb, we see God's loving face." And in all three of those parts of the larger narrative, when you take seriously that from the very beginning, the story of Christ is the unseating of the story of Caesar in that age and ours, it is a rather radical invitation and a truth that's real hard to sentimentalize.
Let me just say this then in terms of the next. Opinion without evidence is simply bias. So the opinion I'm giving you about parabolic overtures, we have to look at the evidence. Does it make sense to you that Matthew 1 and 2 works out? Does it work out as an overture to Matthew? Does Luke as an overture to Luke? That has to be tested. We haven't done that yet. We've just made a claim that might explain the differences. So the next two lectures then will test that. And then, as I said, the final lecture, of course, is what about the similarities? And are they parables? And what type of parables are they? Are they kind of like super parables because they both agree on them? So that's the logic of the series, as it were.
Awesome. Well, this has been a blast, Dom. Absolute blast. It was so much fun for me. I hope everyone that has joined live has enjoyed it. Seems like it from the chat and such. But remember, you will be able to find the video and audio for this on the resource page if you want to go back through it. You can send in your questions via email, respond to any of the class emails. You can use the audio and drop them that way. But we're definitely looking forward to spending some time on this over Advent. And any final words there, Dom, before we head off?
No, we're all set for next week, please God.
All righty. Well, we'll see you all then.